Today I was going to spend making a video about how UFC Fight Pass isn't good because there's a feature built into the application where if you have an account, you can watch pretty much every fight, except if it happened within 3 months, then you have to wait for 3 months to pass in order for you to be able to watch the fight back. And so I was going to talk about how this feature sucks and how whenever fighters make quick turnarounds, I can't watch their fights, and some events that are even longer than 3 months still aren't available. But then you really look at it, and if you can't watch that fight, you can watch 8 other fights. On every single UFC prospect's record, you can see pretty much their entire career on the UFC Fight Pass, so there's no way that that app could be bad. And then I started thinking about other things that I can nitpick at, just for content, right? And then I thought, the UFC doesn't really have a problem. People want to make it seem like there's this huge issue with the UFC, but to me, there is no state of emergency, and I think that with everything, we're kind of right on time. And if you look at these events that we have scheduled after Blanchfield versus Barber, which we're getting in 2 weeks from now, it's loaded. The next couple of months, we're good. Everything is going to be fine. So I want to make this video just to let everyone know that we're going to be alright. Through this, if you're worried about your fandom suffering due to poor events, I just want to contextualize things to make everyone understand that it's really not that horrible. If we look at the timeline currently, we have so much movement going on at 145, 155, and 170. How could you complain about any of the things that are happening right now? And not only is there a bunch of movement happening at these divisions, they're all GOAT level fighters that can establish themselves as greats of this entire organization that are fighting for and controlling these belts. So most known fighters are bigger names in the sport, and they must have events planned out around their appearances. So that's the reason why we can't see them fight all the time, and I feel like everyone understands this. But still though, we get events most weekends, and there's brutal knockouts on every single one of these cards. So fighters get accused of ducking, much more work goes on behind the scenes that isn't being shared. Dana White is pretty adamant that Jones versus Aspinall will happen. He's talking about it in all the different preview videos that he's making, that they're working on the heavyweight fight. I trust the fact that he's saying that, because in the past, whenever he said that he was going to make a fight, they've made the fight, even if we didn't want it to happen. Like Merab versus Sean O'Malley. Whenever Dana White is like, yeah, we're working on that fight and we're going to make it, he usually follows through with these things. I'm satisfied with the way that things are looking right now. There's not really a whole lot going on with Volkanovski's belt. They need more contenders. Bantamweight is kind of the same thing right now, and flyweight, God help them. But moving up from there, pretty much every single weight class is featured in matchups at the very bottom of the screen, and these are all fights that are going to be amazing to see. And we've seen maybe one of them once already, but the draw that Alex Pereira is whenever he fights Magomed Ankalaev twice, people are still going to tune in for that, and it has the potential to be a great fight, because all of Alex Pereira's fights do. He always has that puncher's chance and that death touch power that can leave Magomed in a pool of himself. We're not guaranteed the same outcome in that fight. And we're not guaranteed any outcome in any of these fights. And that's why this is so fun. That's been the thing that's been enjoyable about watching the UFC for all of these years anyways, to me at least. Well, you don't know what's going to happen. It's just like that right now. And we have really interesting fights that we're going to get to watch soon. And people are complaining that this organization is falling off, or we're deteriorating in quality, or things are getting bad, or they're worse than they've ever been. It's not true. It's not true. And you don't need to buy in any of this anti-UFC rhetoric. What's going on with that? And to further highlight my points that I've been making up until right now, I want to talk about a parable. For the sake of this conversation that we're having, it's with Dustin Poirier, this parable, but it could be with your favorite fighter, or any fighter that you like. We love watching Dustin Poirier fight. There is only one Dustin Poirier. And we love his fights because they are all wars. Dustin takes heavy damage in these fights, and he has to rest and recover between usually 8 to 12 months, and then he gets placed on a big event. The Islam Makhachev fight, I think he broke his nose really bad, a rib was broken, and he also partially tore his ACL. In the second Gaethje fight, it didn't go the way that we thought it was going to go, but he ended up getting knocked out brutally, and it was a good fight. There wasn't really a whole lot of action that happened before the high kick, but it was a very high-level chess match. Dustin Poirier ended up losing. It was still a great match. I rewatched it today. So understanding the quality of his output of performances and the fact that he needs time to rest and recover so he can keep on doing this, people still get upset whenever we have to watch Blanchfield versus Barber for one weekend. There's a necessity in us taking the hits and watching these crummy events so that they can set up bigger ones. And we're gonna get bigger ones. They give us the calendar of all of the events that they have planned. So whenever we get a bad week, it's not then something that we can use to condemn the entire sport. You just look past to next week or the week after it, and you're gonna find at least 12 different fights that are good across 24 fights on 2 cards. and sometimes it'll be more than that. They'll do like 13 or 14 fight cards, and it's always a good time. So we have to acknowledge that this is just, we have to do this sometimes. It's not very dignified for us to sit in front of our computer screens and watch Blanchfield versus Barber or a women's strawweight main event. But, I mean, life is all about taking the good with the bad. And quite frankly, the talent pool just isn't deep enough for them to give us great fights every single weekend, because there's not enough great fighters in the sport actively enrolled in the UFC in order for them to do that. And great is subjective because, again, we're talking about the best MMA organization in the world. All of these guys are great. Go watch ONE. Go watch PFL. And tell me what you think of that event. If you really want to bash the UFC and say that things are going downhill. Those organizations never had any motion. And this is going to tail right into my next point, which is going to be hypocrisy. People who complain about the price of pay-per-view events, they don't even buy them. They just stream the events anyways. People talk about cards of the past as well, like they were amazing just because they featured fighters who are champions now while they were still contenders. But we're watching the same thing happen currently. Very many of the fighters that we're watching go through these crummy prelims and these Apex fight nights. They may get to the tops of their divisions. They may end up holding belts, and we never really know who. Because in the moment, whenever those guys were just nobodies, that we were thinking, yeah, this is just a crummy card with a bunch of no-names on it. They were hustling, and they were winning their fights, and they were putting on good performances that people were just ignoring because they weren't high-profile matches. Ultimately, what I need to stress here, and this is partially for me too, just so that I can get the motivation to make the predictions video, we would never elect to watch ONE FC or PFL over a UFC card, even if it was Blanchfield versus Barber. I wouldn't even watch Kasanganay versus Eblin or Fabian Edwards versus Johnny Eblin on a main card for PFL over a UFC event that was headlined by Barber versus Blanchfield, because it's really apples and oranges. We're watching people get knocked out. I feel like through this and the politics and the debating about what's good for the sport and the organization, we're forgetting what we're doing here. Sometimes the fights go to decision, but we're watching people get knocked out. And it's one of the greatest things ever. It's like seeing a double rainbow every single time that I get to lay my eyes on this. And people literally watch these cards happen and they see these knockouts and they point at it and they go, wow, this actually sucks. How? I think it's genuinely just because these are lesser known fighters, but we've still gotten huge clips from these guys. Like the Danny Barlow upset, Sam Patterson got him up out of there. Cesar Almeida versus Abdul Razak Al Hassan. It's just because Alex Pereira hasn't fought 7 times by now and Volk hasn't fought 12 times by now that people are going to be like, man, 2024 was so much better than 2025. But the question that I want to ask you fellas is really how much better were old cards? This is almost 100 events removed from UFC 311 218. And we can look to see that it was headlined by Jose Aldo versus Max Holloway. This might have been their first fight. Overeem versus Ngannou in the co-main event, which was a legendary knockout. Sergio Pettis versus Henry Cejudo, very forgettable fight. Justin Gaethje versus Eddie Alvarez, amazing fight. Torres versus Watterson, nobody is going to ever remember that. And it took up a main event slot. And this would be something that people would cry their eyes out for in 2025 if that were to be something that had ever happened. Over Charles Oliveira, who fought Paul Felder. And this was actually his last loss in the UFC before he went on that crazy run and he got the belt. Then we got Cowboy Oliveira versus Yancy Medros. David Tamer versus Drakkar Klose. Felicia Herrig versus, I don't even know who that is. You got some dude versus Abdul Razak Al Hassan, and then you got Dominic Reyes on the second fight of the card. This was probably like one of his first fights in the UFC. Very strong card. But the reason why it's strong is because we have the context of what the fighters became now. We can look back at it and be like, wow, this is a stacked card. Because all these guys ended up becoming the best fighters in their divisions, most of them, and they're still around. But now, it's like, look at the one to the right. We have a bunch of names. Tagir Ulanbekov, he's going to be around in flyweight for a little bit. I think he just took a fight with Maxim Almacan. Eileen Perez, she's a star. She twerks her butt, bro. They weren't doing that at UFC 218. Diego Ferreira versus Grant Dawson. This is a very high display of wrestling. I feel like, band for band, these cards are comparable for their own reasons. And especially in 3 more years from now, whenever we have the context of Islam Makhachev being the greatest fighter ever to compete, if that does end up going down, or seeing what Umar does achieve whenever he does come back. Prohaska versus Hill is a solid fight no matter whenever it would have been held. I think that Almeida even knocked out Spivak on this card, and we got to watch Rainer de Ritter fight too all on the same night. His fight with Kevin Holland sucked, though, because Kevin Holland lost in a pretty uneventful way. He broke his rib. And then Azamat Bekoev, he made his debut in this fight. And that guy is a legend of the sport. We just got to give these fighters more time to develop, and then they'll have the hype, and then we'll feel a different way about these cards. But looking at it, I hope seeing it side by side can help you guys better understand what I'm trying to say about this. It's really not that bad. Whenever we're talking about, oh yeah, events of old are so much better than the new events. Like, they are competitive with each other, and they're on level. I think that one isn't stopping the other, blowing the other one out of the water completely. This is the way that it's always been. We just get to watch fights, and they're numbered events, so they should be a big deal. We always end up seeing good performances and good fighters who compete on every single one of the numbered cards. Some of them underdeliver, but most of the time they're the UFC's guys who they know will put on good fights. But it's all contemporary, fellas, so we have to remember this. And we have to remember that all the fights that we haven't gotten yet, we can and still probably will get all of them. They will all still happen. The UFC seems to be serious about Jones Aspinall happening in November at Madison Square Garden. Topuria is fighting with Charles at the end of the month, and Islam will fight JDM whenever he's ready. So all we have to do is just wait for all of this to happen. Ilya versus Islam taking place just depends on if both of the fighters win their next matches, and then the UFC is going to hustle to make this fight, since there is no reason for them to not do it. And the reason why I'm saying that we just got to be patient is because these GOAT level fighters usually work on funky schedules, either because of the organization or because of their typical layoff times, which are generally longer than contenders who are just grinding out the top 10s, top 15s, and not really making it past that point. So we just chill. And then while all this develops, we still get to watch knockouts every single Saturday. Brutal knockouts at that. We saw Marc-Andre Barriault catch a hat 2 weeks ago. People complain about certain fighters headlining events like Gilbert Burns or Josh Emmett in 2025, but they're literally there just to get knocked out. If Lerone Murphy has a boring 5-round decision with Josh Emmett, he loses fans, but if he comes out and he chins him, then he's a star. Neil Magny and other gatekeepers of the like, they're knockout donors, and the fact that they fight and they get knocked out by these enthralling prospects that we care about, that stimulates the sport. They do actually very positive work for MMA. They're some of the most important fighters on the roster. And I'm not even trying to be funny right now. Like, somebody has to get knocked out. And it's those guys, and they step up, and they're down to challenge themselves against these fighters who they sometimes beat. Because Neil Magny has beaten Mike Malott. But he's been getting chinned. And it's been cool to watch happen for the fighters that I'm supporting who aren't Neil Magny in those fights. The knockout average for fights this year, 2025, at the midpoint, it's 32.5%. And that's up from 27.6% in 2024. And for all of the great knockout highlights that we got in that year in big event moments, we got a lot more knockouts, it feels like, in 2025. It feels like everyone's just been dropping like flies, and it's glorious. Women have even been starting to knock each other out. So at the end of it all, I know I didn't really do much talking into, other things that the UFC is doing to spearhead their attention from MMA, but I implore all of you, please, 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 do not let the politics sour things. Don't let the influencers get on here and tell you stuff about how they think the sport should look, or if they were running it, how it should be, and how the UFC is being ruined by Dana White, and how we're going past the point of no return. Don't let these things affect your fandom of MMA, especially if you just like watching fights, because largely our product is untainted. We got the old gloves back. The Contender series is producing new talent. They're cutting more fighters every week, so these guys want their jobs, and they're fighting hard. Lately, they've been making a lot of cuts on the roster, so the fighters are making note of this. Whenever they're like down to their last couple of fights on their contract, they're going to get in there and try to do some work. Dana is promoting a lot of things that aren't the UFC, but if he won't let an athlete get larger than the UFC promotion, I don't think any of these child brands exist to do the same thing either. If he's just trying to be the head of a conglomerate that's all directed towards pointing attention back towards the UFC, which through all of the failed attempts at marketing like the Nina drama stuff and the power slap and the boxing stuff, we don't really know how much of these things are actual failures. The Dirty Boxing promotion that Dana White is starting is going to host an event, and he's giving a bunch of opportunities to UFC fighters who have been cut to make money in a sport that's more neutral to their skills, which a lot of them it was not grappling, and that's the reason why they got cut from the UFC. So we're getting like Jairzinho Rosenstruck, and Alex Caceres, who is a fighter who's active on the roster, is also just going to box, because why not? Dana White is cool with it, and he's under contract with Dana White. I think this is cool. What we get out of all of it is more fights. Like, there's something for everybody. If you like submissions, we have Submission Underground. I'm not sure who Power Slap is for. What it isn't doing is taking my eyes off of the things that are going on in MMA and the UFC. And I really don't want this video to be interpreted as me like shilling out for the UFC or being like, oh yeah, I'm a hardcore fan. You know, I'm a love Aaron Blanchfield versus Macy Barber. I don't like it. I don't like it. But I understand the role that these types of fights play so that we can get Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 2 and have it be meaningful, because we didn't just get Khabib versus Tony Ferguson before it, as they're like in the current state of their careers that they're in right now, or just some fantastic fight, you know, whenever they do come around, and they do present themselves in the forms of these random prospects sometimes. Whenever they do come around though in these big events and they're hyped and they meet the hype, oh, it feels so good. And the release that I get as a predictor and a content creator, making these predictions and getting myself excited for these events and then getting to watch them after, you know, maybe we didn't get the best cards for the 2 weeks prior and this one actually does hit. Oh my God, it feels so good. And that's just life, man. So I don't want to, I'm not in a position to speak to you as a coach on this type of thing, but there's an ebb and flow with all things, including fights. You're going to have ups, you're going to have downs. And just like Bryce Mitchell says, brother, I've been at the highest of highs, lowest of lows. I just want to stay in the middle, man. And that's the best thing that we can do. Through whatever cards that we get in the future, let's just stay in the middle. No high peaks, no low lows. Let's just stay in the middle. And that way, if you're approaching these cards with the same disposition towards watching the fights, no matter who's fighting, you have no expectations. And every single thing that happens that is relevant at all is going to exceed your expectations. I didn't have any expectations for Michael Morales versus Gilbert Burns. And Michael Morales knocks out Gilbert Burns in 3.5 minutes, and it's lit, bro. It's lit. I also saw a video of Michael Morales on the street wearing a dress, dude. Oh no, Peyton Talbot part 2. Oh no, oh no, oh no. He's gonna spend Valentine's Day with Bad Bunny or something, since Frank Ocean will be with Talbot. But dude, let's just enjoy the fights. The fights are good. There's going to be good fights coming up. And I want to cover the sport and care about it. And I don't need these guys on YouTube in my ear talking about, oh, the UFC is over, bro. Dana White is going to linger and ruin the brand. Like, no, it's not like that. He built the brand. I think that largely he's making good decisions for it still. The only real thing that I could actually warrant a problem would be the marketing model for the UFC, because that does need some work. But aside from that, we're good. Everything is fine. So let's just chill out, watch some fights, you know? I'm going to be back with a predictions video for the Macy Barber card that's coming up next week. I'm going to have more ideas for videos. We're going to make those. I'll be back tomorrow even. So let's just chill out, watch some fights, you guys. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you've made it to this point in the video. I will catch you fellas in the next one. Peace out.